All right. Well, welcome to News Talk. I'm Brandon Jones, Pops on Pop Culture, host of What's Your Story? And with me, as always, is the co-founder of the Global Dispatch, the editor-in-chief, and all outbreak news things guru himself, sometimes called the Worm and Germs guy, Robert Harriman himself. How you doing, bud?
Great. A lot of stuff going on.
Episode 2, here we go.
A lot of stuff to talk about.
It is. So let's, last week we started off with COVID stuff, but obviously there's no way to kind of ignore the landscape of things with George Floyd. And I was going to do a quick overview of that, kind of give people a little bit about what we actually know, not what's, kind of been thrown out there by some folks, and then kind of transition into my first topic. But right out of the get-go, we actually do have 2 autopsy results. So the first one kind of came back, did not give the sort of activists the thoughts that they wanted, basically referred a lot more to his heart disease, underlying conditions, and being in duress. And of course, the second one's come back and used the word homicide. So now we have pretty much what we expected to have, right? We expected to have something like that.
That happens a lot in multiple autopsies. I
Sure.
mean, each side will get an autopsy and they differ. So
Right.
Not really unusual.
Right. So I'd heard a term this week, and we get to the charges. Of course, Derek Chauvin was arrested. He's been charged. They've ramped up those charges and that kind of thing. So we'll get to that in a little bit later. But here I want to focus on a term I'd heard about. Didn't know much about this. Wanted to see what your thoughts are on this. I found this extremely interesting. So there's a term that's used. I heard this from Brandon Tatum. He did an interview with Dave Rubin. And he uses the term excited delirium, which is also called agitated delirium.
Right.
So this is a term that's used when an individual may have some type of drugs or chemicals in their system. And basically they can kind of have, and you've heard this before, right? People are on drugs, they have like superhuman behavior, right? They get really, really strong. Mm-hmm. They start doing things. And then, of course, when they crash exorbitantly more exponentially dangerous than before. Officers are supposed to be trained to recognize this. And Brandon Tatum, who's a former police officer,
right, had
talked about this as he recognized the entire scene this way. The autopsy results have come back, and clearly he had fentanyl,
yes,
and he had some sort of methamphetamine products. I'm not sure if you know exactly what the chemicals were, but no, that's what I heard. Mm-hmm. So he had some sort of things in his system. And the information I looked up on this is the excited delirium. It talks about that this is a test where they subjected they used males that are over 30. They used different synthetic drugs. And some of the symptoms that they found was elevated body temperature. Many subjects were found to partially be clothed or naked. They would actually strip off clothes to cool off. They would have elevated heart rates, profuse sweating, skin flushing, shaking or shivering, likely due to the elevated body temperature. Also strong associated with this is with some of the drugs that he had in his system: cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, and other synthetic drugs. And 89% of the excited delirium cases were perceived to be under some sort of influence of either drugs, alcohol, or both. And it's important for officers to recognize these behavioral signs. Sometimes they will just be acting like they're the usual drunk. But these are patients that these are subjects, patients that could run into traffic. Sometimes at night you will see the way they respond to headlights and windshield reflections, those kinds of things. So it's just a very interesting concept. I think it was interesting that Officer Tatum brought this up because it was something I don't know much about or have ever heard of.
Do you know why Brandon Tatum brought this up? What was his motivation?
He said based on his personal experience. He said we had been trained on this. From what I had seen is what little video footage there was of the lead up to this. He says, and then of course the reports that he had been fighting back. He was very, very strong, and just the tactic of using. They're supposed to have their knee on the shoulder blade and that kind of thing. Sometimes it can be a little bit higher for someone that's bigger and pushing back. So trying to piece together, kind of in his opinion of what happened, he said this was a case that he felt may fall into that. So I thought it was an interesting question. Did George Floyd die as a consequence of excited delirium under the duress of this physical arrest? So
well, I guess the interesting thing with that is if Tatum is right, how's that going to affect the charges?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a very heated case, and we may see the charges continue to be changed. I think we've seen obviously the activists really trying to keep things down a very streamlined narrative. Now, have you seen anything that has been, let's say, Officer any of the officers, their, say, Facebook page, social media, anything that has referred to anything that would indicate that they actually are racist or had any sentiment against another race. I know a couple are minorities.
One was Asian, I thought.
One is Asian for sure. I think one might be Hispanic, but I could be wrong. So have you seen I've not found anything.
I think the only thing I saw was the actual guy that's being charged with now second-degree murder. They were throwing up his Facebook picture of him wearing a MAGA hat or something.
Oh,
like that.
okay.
So of course that
The association is the political association.
they jumped all over
Okay.
that. It was, or no, it didn't say MAGA. It was MAGA color. Make America White Again.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty radical thing to have,
Yeah.
though. So we make sure that we would fact check that too, because a lot of those
Yeah.
things are doctored.
Yeah.
So I know there was a.
But they showed it on one of the cable news channels. That's where I saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to fact check that for you,
Yeah.
folks. Make sure that checks out. 'Cause I know there was the women that had different shirts lined up, and they had shirts that said "Make America Great Again," but someone censored it and photoshopped in white, and that has been proven. Even Snopes indicates that as an thing. So we'll have to kind of validate that for folks. The thing I heard.
I think it's really important though that this investigation looks at the history of these guys though, because it kind of smells of, particularly the main guy, Chauvin. Chauvin. He may have a history of brutality.
Right, and pretty much a long track record of some questionable, tactics, being physical when that was unnecessary. Definitely fits the narrative of police brutality and at least raises the question. That is even though we've kind of drifted way into, protests and rallies that are more about race, the police brutality case obviously is something that definitely holds with pretty much everyone. I mean, you have everyone, all the stereotypes, the Rush Limbaugh and those folks that don't, get credit for this. They're like, well, of course this is inappropriate. Of course. So now we've drifted into a big divide, which we can get to later. But have you heard anybody talk about any effects of the drugs or anything like that either? I really hadn't heard much about this. So I was just curious if you had.
No, and I suspect, particularly the media, are not going to touch that because that's going to look bad for
It goes against the narrative.
George Floyd.
It goes against the narrative. Right.
I honestly didn't put a lot into it either, just by looking at the video. I thought the video said it all, and I think most Americans believe that.
And the video does say it all. I mean, I don't think that you have your leg on someone's throat for 8.5 or almost 9 minutes. It doesn't matter what the situation is. It's just totally unacceptable.
Yeah. So I mean, I just think I do believe I'm kind of with the liberals on this, that you do gotta, these police stations need to do a better job of monitoring themselves.
Sure.
I don't think the federal, a lot of people are coming out saying we need this task force and this task force.
Yeah.
This is not a federal issue, in my opinion. This is a.
And how could you come up with a policy that's going to work for New York City and a small town in Montana, and then a moderately town, let's say Arizona? You're not going to come up with a policy that's going to work for what these officers are going to go up against. It's just not.
Yeah.